China is looking for global influence as a rising world power, but it's also struggling with all the problems of a developing country. Miles Young, the CEO of Ogilvy and Mather, says Chinese President Hu Jintao should simply tell it like it is in his upcoming trip to the United States.
I think the message is about the interdependence of the US and China, that they both need each other, and that the US needs China, actually, and can't pretend that it doesn't, which it does like to do, in fact. And I think also, hopefully, there can be some sense in the US of the challenges and difficulties which China faces. I think it's given very little sympathy, actually, for the problems which it has to overcome as a country. It's a very complex, huge country. It's undergone a massive industrial revolution in a very short period of time. It's not easy, actually, to manage it and to take it forward. So maybe there will be a little bit of enlightenment in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And how can China convey that the challenges?
I think it's got to speak it fairly forcefully. So, you know, sometimes there may be concerns about being too honest, if you like, or too truthful. And I don't think anyone should hold back from spelling it out as it is, and that the US has got a vested interest in a stable China.
And now, what do events like, for instance, the jailing of Liu Xiaobo or the persecution of Falun Gong, does that work against China's efforts to try to gain international sympathy?
I actually don't think so, no. And I think that in recent history, and since the Second World War, there have always been countries that have had issues with dissidents and with people who project alternative views. So human rights has been an issue which has always been around. I think if anything, it's becoming less of an issue, let's say, than it was in people's perceptions 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
And why is that?
I think because people can see that China's becoming an increasingly pluralistic society. You know, there are limits, but within those limits, actually there is a lot of freedom. Now, when I say people are seeing this, I'm not sure that everyone is. So one of the things that astonishes me, for instance, is that in the US, there's very little knowledge of the development of the Chinese internet. In fact, some people say there's no internet in China. The degree of ignorance is that great. Certainly, a lot of professionals in our business don't believe that there's a social media scene in China. Why not? Because Facebook doesn't exist here, but there's much more to social media than Facebook. So the ferment of ideas, the exchanges, the innovations, the creative thinking, all the things that are being generated by Web 3.0 are as much a Chinese phenomenon as they are an American phenomenon or a British phenomenon or a Brazilian phenomenon. But that is simply not known. So there's a big gap in terms of perceptions and realities. And actually, not even that. There's just a lack of knowledge and information.
How about the Made in China label? Does that carry a positive or a negative connotation?
It carries a negative connotation. And so if you ask Interbrand, which is a competitor of ours, did some research recently, and they asked people whether it was positive or negative, and something like 60% around the world said negative. And there's a reason, of course, because it's associated with the old image of China, which is a factory, and it just produces things that other people design. Actually, we do research also, and what our research shows is that there's no fundamental obstacle whatsoever in believing that China can design and make really high-quality products. But the emphasis has to be now on design. So I think Made in China is a dangerous slogan, actually. Designed in China is what should be projected. And actually you're starting to see now in some sectors there are very, very progressive centres of design and innovation. So for instance, green energy, for instance, solar energy and so on. It's a fantastic Chinese case study. It's probably leading the world in these sorts of solutions. It's designed in China. It's not just made in China. So that's where the national agenda has to go. That's really how China has to move from being just a manufacturing economy into being an added value economy which offers more than just products off an assembly line.